We now begin Seder Nashim, which discusses the halachos of women and their relationships to men. First Mesechta in Seder Nashim is Mesechas Yevamos, which discusses the halachos of Yibum. A general introduction is available in a separate recording. Briefly, Yibum is a connection between a woman whose husband died without children and that husband's brother. So in a situation in which a man, let's call him Ruvain, dies without children, his wife is now obligated to marry Ruvain's brother, who we'll call Shimon. In all our examples, Ruvain will usually be the one who dies without children, and Shimon will be his first available surviving brother. If there are additional brothers, we'll call them Levi, Yehuda, and so forth. Now, in a situation like this, Ruvain is gone. If Ruvain had no children, irrespective of whether his wife had children or not, if Ruvain had no children, his wife is now obligated to marry Shimon. She has a connection called Zika. Shimon could do Yibum. If there are other brothers, any of them could do Yibum. And if they do not want to, they can break the connection by doing a procedure called Chalitza, which we will learn in detail later in the Masechta. So the Masechta begins by discussing 15 situations in which the woman has a prior relationship with Shimon that makes it forbidden for her to marry him. Now, of course, she was always Shimon's brother's wife. Shimon's brother is Ruvain, and she's Ruvain's wife. However, that is not a problem, because Yibum, by definition, will always be a former brother's wife, and that prohibition, although it's forbidden generally for somebody to marry his brother's wife, that prohibition dissolves as soon as he dies, and there's a Yibum connection. If there's no Yibum connection, that prohibition still exists, but there's a Yibum connection, that's gone. However, there could be other relationships, which would make it forbidden for this woman to marry Shimon, and the Mishnah begins by listing what 15 of those relationships are that carry kares. There are 21 kares relationships, but 6 of them could not exist in a situation like this, because if they would also apply that this woman would be forbidden to marry Ruvain. Now, there are 15 in which she could be legally married to Ruvain and still have a forbidden relationship to Shimon. We'll begin by listing those 15 and then discuss some of their halachas further. So the Mishnah begins and it says there are 15 relationships that Ruvain's wife, again, Ruvain is the one who died, that his wife has to Shimon, and therefore she does not have a mitzvah of Yibum. The mitzvah of Yibum is broken. It doesn't start. There is no obligation to do Yibum. There's no obligation to do Chalitza to Shimon. Now, those relationships, the first 9 of them will be where where the wife of Ruvain is a descendant of Shimon, or Shimon's wife, or a parent of Shimon's wife. That way, that means that Shimon has another wife. That would be the reason that this woman is related to Shimon and not to Ruvain. So the first 5 are if Ruvain was married to Shimon's daughter, who was Ruvain's niece, that's okay, or Shimon's granddaughter, either through Shimon's son or through Shimon's daughter. So that means that Ruvain's wife is Shimon's son's daughter or Shimon's daughter's daughter. Any of those situations, she could be permitted to marry Ruvain, and now she's falling to Shimon, but there is no mitzvah of Yibum, because now the woman who's falling to Shimon is his own daughter or granddaughter. Also, she could be the daughter, the granddaughter through a son, or the granddaughter through a daughter of Shimon's wife. There, in a situation like that, she has no connection to Ruvain at all. She could also be Shimon's mother-in-law, that is, Shimon's wife's mother, who was previously married, gave birth to Shimon's wife, then her husband either divorced her or died and she went and married Ruvain. So it could be Shimon's mother-in-law, or it could be Shimon's mother-in-law's mother, in the same situation, or Shimon's father-in-law's mother. All these cases, these women are forbidden to Shimon. They were legally married to Ruvain. And those are 9 cases that the woman who's falling to Yibum to Shimon cannot do Yibum to Shimon, and there is no mitzvah of Yibum or Chalitza there at all. Now, if there's an additional brother, she does have a mitzvah of Yibum to that brother, but to Shimon there isn't one. Now, we now have 3 situations in which Ruvain's wife was related to Shimon because Ruvain and Shimon were only brothers through their father. They shared a father but did not share a mother. And therefore, Shimon had other siblings through his mother that are not related to Reuven. There are 3 such examples. One such example is if he had a sister through a mother who was not related to Reuven. That sister went and married Reuven. Then Reuven died. She fell to Yibam to Shimon. Shimon obviously cannot Yibam with his own sister. Another situation would be if it was his mother's sister. That is, Shimon's mother's sister went and married Reuven. Same situation would apply. Shimon's mother would not apply because Reuven can never marry Shimon's mother. That would be his own father's wife because they share a father. Now, the Mishnah inserts here, between this list of 3, it inserts Shimon's wife's sister. That is not related to Reuven. If Shimon's wife had a sister who went and married Reuven, so he had 2 brothers married to 2 sisters, Shimon would then have his own wife's sister falling to him to Yibam. As long as his wife is alive, that's forbidden, and there would be no mitzvah of Yibam. The Mishnah now goes back and adds a 3rd example of relationships that are created because Reuven and Shimon are brothers only through the father, and Shimon has other siblings through his mother. And that's if Shimon now has a brother through his mother. That brother had a wife, and then that relationship ended either because that brother died or divorced her. That woman is now usher to Shimon as his brother's former wife. That's a relationship, that's an issue that exists even after that marriage ends. Now this brother's former wife then went and married Reuven, she was not related to him. They were not siblings at all. And then of course Reuven died without children, so this woman now falls to Yibam, to Shimon. Shimon has his former brother from the mother's wife falling to him to Yibam, and that is forbidden as well, and therefore that cannot happen. Now, the next example is not based on any such relationship, and that's if there is a 3rd brother who did not have a mitzvah of Yibam to Reuven in the first place. That 3rd brother would be Levi. If Levi was born after Reuven died, then there is no mitzvah of Yibam between Reuven's wife and Levi. Now, as a matter of fact, that would be a situation in which Reuven's wife is forbidden to Levi, because since there's no mitzvah of Yibam, because he wasn't alive at the same time as Reuven, since there's no mitzvah of Yibam, therefore the old Isser of brother's wife occurs. Now, what would happen then would be, is if this woman again falls to Yibam, now you could have a situation of a brother's wife who was not alive at the same time as him. So let's say what happened would be as follows. Reuven dies without children. Then Levi's born. Now this woman is forbidden to Levi. She's not forbidden to Shimon. So Shimon goes and does Yibam and marries Reuven's wife. Then Shimon dies without children. Now this woman falls to Levi again. But she's forbidden to him because of Achos, because of Eshes Ach. She is the wife of Levi's brother Reuven, where there was no Yibam relationship in the first place. So even though there's a Yibam relationship because of her marriage to Shimon, who died, since there's a non-existent Yibam relationship between his other brother, because of his other brother Reuven, this woman is now forbidden to Levi, and the mitzvah of Yibam caused by the death of Shimon is cancelled and does not exist. Now, the Gemara the Mishnah has one more list here, one more item on the list, which is a special relationship between Shimon and his own relatives, and that is Shimon's daughter-in-law. So let's say Shimon had a son who was married to another woman. That would be Shimon's daughter-in-law. She's forbidden to Shimon eternally. If that son of Shimon's, he dies without any Yibam complications, and then the daughter-in-law goes and marries Reuven, then Reuven dies without children, she falls to Yibam to Shimon, she would be falling to Shimon to her own father-in-law, which would be forbidden, and that would be the 15th example of a situation in which a woman is cancelled from Yibam or Chalitza because of her pre-existing relationship with the Yavam. Now, the Mishnah adds and says, not only does this apply to the woman herself, it also applies to her tzara. So in all of these situations, if there was a second wife married to Reuven, that wife would also not have a mitzvah of Yibam to Shimon because she is the tzara. Tzara means the co-wife. She's the co-wife of a woman who had her Yibam relationship canceled because of a pre-existing relationship that also cancels the mitzvah of Yibam to her co-wife. So that tzara would now have no mitzvah of Yibam either. Says the Mishnah further, it also applies to the tsaras tsara. So let's say that tsara goes and does Yibum to a third brother who did not have a pre-existing relationship. So again, let's go through it. If Reuven dies, his wife is forbidden to Shimon because of one of these 15 relationships. His other wife, who is not related to Shimon, also has no mitzvah of Yibum to Shimon because she's the co-wife of a woman with an existing relationship. However, both of them also fall Yibum to Levi. Levi does Yibum to the co-wife. He's now married to the co-wife, and Levi has another wife of his own. Then Levi dies without children, and both of them fall back to Yibum to Shimon. So the co-wife is forbidden to him, because she's the co-wife of the previous woman in the previous marriage. She's the co-wife. She was forbidden to him to Yibum, and the Yibum was canceled because she was the co-wife of the relation of the erva. Now Levi's other wife is a co-wife of a co-wife. She's not a co-wife of the original co-wife. She's a co-wife of the. She's not a co-wife of the original erva to Shimon, but she is a co-wife of the co-wife of the erva to Shimon. It's called a tsaras tsara, and therefore she also has her relationship to Shimon canceled. There is no yibum and no chalitza requirement. Now this chain can continue on and on and on with each additional brother. You can have a co-wife's co-wife and a co-wife's co-wife and the co-wife of a co-wife of a co-wife. This continues on throughout all generations as far as it can possibly go. Now the Mishnah continues with more halachos. The Mishnah says all these situations in which an erva, that is a woman that has a forbidden relationship to Shimon, cancels her own yibum and chalitza and also cancels that of her co-wife, of her tzara, this only true if she was still married to Reuven at the time that he died. If her marriage to Reuven was canceled through any way, then it would not have any effect on the co-wife, and that co-wife would still fall to yibum. Now, what could be a situation in which a marriage is canceled? So it could be that she died before Reuven died, or she was divorced from Reuven before he died, or she could do something called mian. Mian could dissolve a marriage in a particular circumstance, that is, where she wasn't ever actually married to him deraisa, she was only married to Rabbanan. That is, if she became an orphan, she lost her father at a young age, and her mother's or brother married her off to a man. That relationship is a derabanan marriage. It does not count deraisa, and she can walk out at any time and do what's called mian and dissolve that relationship. So if she did that mian, then the tzara would not have any exemptions here. The last case is where she's an islandess, and that is if she herself, if this ever was found to be a woman who cannot bear children, she has special masculine traits and cannot bear children of her own, situation like that, there is no mitzvah of yibum to her. There's no mitzvah of yibum to her, then there's no cancellation of her yibum, and therefore it does not help her tzara, does not free her tzara of the connection of yibum that she has. Now, the Mishnah points out that islandess case cannot apply to the mother-in-law, the mother-in-law's mother, or the father-in-law's mother. All of those bore children. A woman who's an islandess cannot bear children. She also can't do mian because she's obviously not a minor anymore. Only a minor can walk out of a marriage, not a woman who is already an adult and stayed in the marriage longer. Now, the Mishnah ends with one halacha. In a situation where a woman could have done mian, but she didn't do mian, and she still can do mian. Now, this halacha is interesting because this woman only has a derabanan marriage to the original husband. So that's if Reuven is married to a kitana, a minor who is married to him by her mother or brothers, she has only a derabanan marriage. That means midirabanan she's married to him, and since she's an erva to Shimon, her tzara has no relationship to Shimon. However, midiraisa she's not married to Reuven, and therefore Reuven's other wife has no tzara who is an erva to Shimon. Again, midirabanan Reuven's second wife is the tzara of an erva and therefore cannot do yibum to Shimon. Midiraisa, Reuven's second wife is not a tzara to Shimon because the other wife, the first wife, was only married through a derabanan marriage. Therefore, Reuven's second wife has no pre-existing connection is not the tzara of any erva to Shimon, and should be able to do regular yibum. So you have a situation in which she's chayav to do yibum deraisa, but she's not allowed to do yibum derabanan. In a case like that, she has to do chalitza. Chalitza releases the bond without doing any actual yibum marriage. This concludes the Mishnah. We have a brief discussion in the Gemara before the end of the daf, and that is what is the logic in the order of the 15 cases listed in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says that really Achos Isha, that is the sister of the wife's sister, should be listed first, because that is where we see the source that when Shimon has a pre-existing relationship with one of these women that makes him forbidden to her, she's a pre-existing, she's a relative that he's forbidden to marry, that is the source. The case of the wife's sister, that's the source that Yibum doesn't exist in a case like that. So that should really be listed first. So why is that not listed first? So Gemara says, well, maybe it's not listed first because we chose a different logic to our order, and that is we discussed the stricter forbidden relationships before the more milder forbidden relationships. That's the first 5 cases of a daughter, a granddaughter, or wife's granddaughter. Those are all Isser Sreifa, that if a man were to have relations with any of those women, he would get burning by the Beis Din. All the other ones are only kares. Kares is considered lighter because he can do tshuva, and he won't have kares. It's not punishable by the court. Therefore, maybe we listed the stricter ones first. The Gemara says if that would be true, then we should list kalasai, the daughter-in-law, before the kares ones, because kalasai is a relationship that's punishable by skila, by stoning. That's stricter than kares, and therefore it should be listed first. So why do we have this order where we list these, and then we go to the kares ones, and then we go to the other relationships afterwards? Additionally, another problem with suggesting this answer is within all the relationships that are sreifa, we should have listed the source of all of them first. And the source of all of them is chamaisai, the mother-in-law. That should be listed before the other ones, but it's not. We first have the children. The Gemara answers the reason that we listed the case of the daughter first is because the fact that it is forbidden for one to marry his daughter is a halacha that's learned from a drasha. There's a special drasha we learn from a Gzeira Shava, from the word Heina, that is forbidden for one to marry his daughter. We learn from Zima, another Gzeira Shava, that there is a punishment of Sreifa in a case like that. And therefore, because it was learned through a drasha, it's chaviva, it's more beloved. It's a drasha that we have to use to get to that halacha. And therefore, it is listed first. Even though all the cases in the Mishnah are only the fact that they're forbidden to yibum is learned from a drasha, this is the only case in which the fact that it's even forbidden altogether, even in a non-yibum situation, that is learned from a drasha. All the other ones are explicit, and that's why it was listed first.